Well, it only took a month, but finally, while I was away on vacation, the mainstream media deigned to acknowledge the existence of my film, What is a Woman, which is still available to watch, by the way, at whatisawoman.com. In an article in the prestige scumrag New York Magazine titled, "The Right's Dangerous Just Asking Questions Anti-Trans Campaign is Working," writer Malcolm Harris offers something of a review of the documentary. Although, as we'll see, he spends most of the time reviewing a version of the film that I didn't make, but which he wishes I had made. So it begins with this claim. He writes, quote, "Over time, words change. Stretched by the practicalities of real-world usage, or our language evolves and warps. It's an organic, unavoidable, and even auspicious process." Now, we can already see the difficulty here. Harris conflates warp and evolve as though the two are synonyms, but they're not. And what could be more revealing than somebody on the left thinking that warp and evolve are the same idea? They're not at all. What has happened to the word woman in modern times, and so many other words besides that one, is an example of language being warped, but it's not an example of language evolving. Okay, language evolves gradually, organically, in order to make meaning more clear in common usage. But what's happened with the word woman has not been gradual, it has not been organic, and it certainly has not made the meaning of the word more clear. This is a top-down decree from people with institutional power, simply declaring all at once that the word no longer means what humans for millennia thought it meant. Not only that, but anyone who insists on the old meaning is subject to various penalties. Okay, that's not language evolution. That's always a good hint, by the way. When language has changed, and there are penalties put in place for people who don't keep up with the change, that's a pretty good indication that it's not actually evolution of language. Because evolution of language, natural evolution of language, doesn't have its own law enforcement arm that goes with it, okay? This is what it looks like when language is forcibly warped. It's not what it looks like when language evolves. Harris can't tell the difference between the two, and that's his first problem, though it's certainly not his only one. Now, he continues, "The new anti-trans documentary, What is a Woman?, begs its title question, not in the sense of suggesting it, but in the fallacious way of assuming its own answer. Despite mountains of evidence, the movie's producers and on-screen guide, right-wing pundit Matt Walsh, do not believe that people can change their gender. Actually, as Walsh reveals by the end, he doesn't accept that humans express gender at all. He hand waves at chromosomes once or twice, but he leans hardest on common sense. There are boys and girls, men and women, males and females, penises and vaginas." Mountains of evidence, he says. Now, it should already go without saying that Harris never provides any of this evidence. There's a whole mountain of it out there, supposedly, and yet he doesn't extract even one pebble from this mountain and present it to us. There's no link, there's no citation, there are no examples. The mountain is invisible, it would seem. But it's there, okay? And it's really, really big, you guys. But we just have to take his word for it, is all. Next, hilariously, you heard him there. He chides me for leaning hard on common sense, as if that's a bad thing. We already know that using common sense is the ultimate sin, the great heresy on the left. You're not supposed to rely on common sense. That is, you're not supposed to rely on the fundamental understanding of reality shared by nearly everyone who's ever lived. That's what common sense is. Instead, you're supposed to rely on the uncommon and insensible sense of guys like Malcolm Harris. And yet, nearly a sentence after accusing me of using common sense, accusing me of it, Harris switches gears and declares that the film and all of my ideas about gender are rooted in religious precepts. He writes, quote, "By disguising a religious precept as a reasonable question, Walsh and his team have set out to win new friends and encourage existing allies at the same time. It's an effective strategy, and the majority of us who understand the factual existence of trans people can't afford to ignore them. Matt Walsh is a Christian, and he believes that his God is the source of our shared single nature. He also believes that his God is my God and your God and everyone's God. Quote, God exists. God is existence. God is reality. God is permanent, inexhaustible, unending. God is identity. The origin of our own identity is found in God," he writes in 2017's The Unholy Trinity, blocking the left's assault on life, marriage, and gender. Transgenderism, as he calls it, always in scare quotes, it means that man achieves his final victory over truth and truth's God. Okay, it's clear from what we might charitably call his writings that Walsh is a Christian fundamentalist who is personally and professionally dedicated to making sure God's law is law. And yet, in his biggest, most prominent piece of content yet, Walsh never talks about his God at all, a curious omission in a movie about reality and identity. Now, he goes on from here, continuing to quote a book I wrote 5 years ago, calling me a religious fundamentalist. He mocks ideas like transubstantiation. He calls fans of my movie my co-religionists. Now, I hate to say I told you so to those conservatives who criticized my film for not having an explicitly biblical message, but I told you so. It is strikingly clear from this New York Magazine article that the opponents of the film really wish that I had framed it in religious terms. They want our arguments on this topic to be entirely faith-based and biblical. They desperately need us to be seen as making a religious case because they are making a religious case. They want the war over biology to be a holy war, our religion against theirs. Then we can't criticize them for being doctrinal and dogmatic because we're being the same way. We would all be in the same boat, or maybe if not in the same boat, we would be in different boats floating on the same sea. But there's no reason for us to play the game on those terms. I am a devoutly religious person. I, of course, stand by everything I said in my book that he quoted there. All of that is 100% true, and I'm proud that I wrote it, and I'm glad that he quoted it. But that has absolutely nothing at all to do with my conviction that women have babies and men don't. Okay? I didn't learn that from my religion. And even if I didn't believe in my religion, I would still recognize this truth, just as I would know that 2 + 2 = 4, no matter if I was a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist or an atheist. They are the religionists on this issue. The writer of this article so badly needs to argue the matter on religious terms that he's simply inventing a religious angle that doesn't exist in the film and arguing against that instead. So he's basically saying, well, you didn't make it your argument religious, but I know that it's really religious, so I'm going to argue against it as if it is. Later he writes, quote, "What is a woman throws trans women's existence into question. The form of inquiry can be divorced from its content, and to ask if trans women are really women is not just asking questions, especially if a bigot deity has already told you the answer, and especially if you're spending a pile of cash on advertising." So there he is again, bringing God into a review of a film that, as he admits, or rather laments, never mentions God at all. He also says that the movie throws trans women's existence into question. Though, of course, I don't at all question the existence of people who identify themselves as trans women. Those individual human beings do certainly exist. If they didn't, there'd be no need for the movie. What I question are the claims those people make about themselves. So the people exist, absolutely, but they make claims about the world and about themselves, and some of those claims are incorrect. That is my contention. Just as I don't deny the existence of anorexics, though I do deny the reality and factual validity of their self-perception, specifically the perception of themselves as obese. I deny that. More from the article says, if you press play on What is a Woman, which I advise not doing, with the accurate factual knowledge that some women are trans, I have a hard time imagining anything Walsh has to offer will confuse you. Anyone with some background on the topic knows that the anti-trans interviewees, which include a hateful doctor, a regretful phalloplasty recipient, and a sore loser cis student athlete, are not representative figures. So we have another gear shift here as he goes from admitting that the film is devastatingly effective, I mean, he says so right in the headline, to shrugging it off as sort of weak and irrelevant. He also demonstrates how the transgender gives men license to say things about women that they would never get away with saying otherwise. So here he just scornfully writes off a young woman who simply wants a fair playing field, calling her a sore loser. That men can only talk about women and to women in that way in the context of the trans debate. That's the only time that's ever allowed. Then, after accusing me of deliberately inciting violence, he wraps things up this way. He says, quote, "If that's the anti-trans playbook, then Walsh is a player coach leading by example. With What is a Woman, they've spent millions to take the strategy to a new level. The plan is working. This year's Pride Month looks to have a casualty count. If Walsh and his ilk are successful, next year's will be higher. They're begging for it. Now, bucking the trend throughout most of the article, he does attempt to provide some evidence for the Pride Month casualty count claim. So he links to an article in the Baltimore Sun from a few weeks ago about a row home fire in the city, which occurred across the street from where somebody allegedly burned a pride flag. And a few people were injured in the house fire. Now, there's no known connection between the alleged flag burning and the house fire. So again, there was across the street, they found allegedly a pride flag that had apparently been burned. And then on the other side of the street, there was a house fire. One did not cause or lead to the other, as far as anybody knows. No cause has been determined of either fire. Nobody knows if the house fire was deliberate. And if it was, we don't know why it was started. So we know none of that whatsoever. So there are about 4 or 5 leaps you'd have to make to connect the house fire to anti-LGBT sentiment. And then there's another 1 or 2 leaps to continue the connection all the way to my film. Yet this is the best Harris can do. It's not his fault. It's very difficult to find real examples of actual anti-LGBT violence because it hardly ever happens. That doesn't stop him from suggesting that there's an epidemic of a type of violence for which he could not find even one confirmed example. That, of course, is the common theme with Harris and his ilk. The facts don't stop them. They simply shout their bald assertions and then cover their ears in case anyone shouts back. That's why Harris, by the way, locked down his Twitter account and went to private as soon as his article was published. That's how you know someone's really confident in what they wrote, right? They publish it and then lock everything down and go hide. And so, hiding under his bed, he may not be able to hear me say it, but I must say it all the same. To Malcolm Harris of the New York Magazine, you are today canceled. If you want to join my exclusive fan base, or a cult, that's what it is, we're forming a cult, then all you got to do is click the subscribe button and ring the bell below this video to stay up to date with all my content. And if you want even more, you can watch or listen to my show at thedailywire.com, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Looking forward to welcoming you to the Sweet Baby Gang.